Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Congressional Western Caucus Roundtable titled Scientific Innovation in the Clean Energy Sector. I'm really delighted to be able to introduce and welcome two of my good friends in Congress, Representative Jim Baird from the great state of Indiana, and Representative Frank Lucas from the great state of Oklahoma, who's also the ranking member of the Science Committee. Jim is also a member of that Science Committee. Appreciate you guys being here and give you a sec to say hello.
Hello. Hello, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to be here with you today and discuss an issue that's critically important to all of us in the future of the country. We're all three involved in agriculture, amongst many things, and how we make sure that we have the energy resources, the right kind of energy, cost-effective. It's probably one of the most important elements to the survival of our industry, and for that matter, our country. Maybe the world, more accurately.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And so I want to thank you for being here and being part of this discussion. Jim, I know it's important. Energy is important to the state of Indiana.
Well, absolutely, and I really enjoy being on this Science Committee as well as being on the Agriculture Committee. So energy is an important ingredient as we produce the food and fiber for this country. And fuel supply is important. I think agriculture plays an important role as we look at climate change and some of the other issues facing us at this point in time. And so I'm glad to be a part of this.
Good. Well, thanks for being here. And I'll introduce our other guests in a second, but I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules for being with us. So you may not be aware of this, but right now, we're in the midst of National Clean Energy Week. And so what we wanted to do was highlight some of the things that are going on in Congress, in the public sector, and also in the private sector as it relates to clean energy. And, I used to be a member of the Science Committee, so I wanted to make sure that what is sometimes maybe a committee that doesn't get the recognition that it deserves for many of the important decisions that are made here, and for some of the contributions that are made, particularly now in the energy sector, and to allow you gentlemen to talk a little bit about some of the things that you're doing. This public and private partnership that everybody hears about and talks about, we're personifying it here by allowing this discussion to happen so people can really, truly understand what that means. And the kind of investments that, Frank and Jim, I'll let you guys talk about the increase in appropriations towards research that we've been able to garner over the last several years. And I'll let you gentlemen talk about what that means and how that has been helpful in moving technologies forward and in bringing forth some of the things that really will revolutionize our energy sector in this country. And like you said, Jim, to keep us with a critical source of fuel that we need. I sit on the Energy and Water Appropriation Subcommittee, so I can attest to the partnership that we have in making sure some of these important things move forward. You've got the policy part of it. We make sure that there's investments made, and I think that's a great team effort that we've been able to demonstrate over the last few years. So we've been able to accomplish a lot, and I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to highlight some of those things that you've been able to do. So, Frank, I'll turn to you first. You're the ranking member of the Science Committee.
Science, space, and technology.
Space and
Absolutely.
technology. I'll just give you an opportunity to talk about some of the things that you're doing and look forward to hearing.
First and foremost, let me say, Chairman, being a farmer by trade, my wife refers to herself as the rancher. Even though we all know that the world we live in is a challenging climate. Matter of fact, I remind people, since the winter of 1888, every rancher's been a farmer. Because prior to that in the West, they didn't feed their cattle in the wintertime, and they had this system and an incredible snowstorm that affected not only the Northwest, but all the way across the North America and buried New York City and slaughtered millions of cattle because of the bad weather, demonstrated that we cannot depend on a consistent set of weather patterns. So all ranchers are farmers, no matter what they may want to say. I'm thinking of my wife here. So I see firsthand the effects of a changing climate, and it is changing. I live in rural west central Oklahoma. My family's been there since 1900. The weather patterns are changing. Now, is it global industrial activity? Absolutely. But the fact of the matter is, weather patterns are changing, and we have to respond to that. As farmers, as energy producers, as consumers, if we're going to survive in this great world that we live in. And that brings me to the point about the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. We're the committee that I refer to as not so much the stick committee. Many committees enforce rules and regulations, determine resource allocations. The fact of the matter is, we're the carrot committee. We are focused on basic research, working with the great researchers of this country, the universities, private industry, the energy companies, to come up with innovative ways, enhanced, improved technologies through the use of basic research to enable us to step forward to meet those challenges and to have opportunities to garnish new resources. I would suggest to anyone who cared to take note that I'm very proud of the historic role in the Science Committee, because if you look at the approximately 10% decline in U.S. greenhouse gases between 2005 and 2018, for example, a great deal of that comes from the transition to natural gas. And that availability of natural gas is a result of brand new, at the time, technologies developed in the national research labs, made available to industry to hone and improve and perfect and utilize 3D seismographing, horizontal drilling, the fracking technologies. It made a huge, huge difference. And literally, not just natural gas, but in traditional crude oil too, has led to us, in essence, being energy independent for the first time. Well, since you and I were born or little kids, Dan, it's made a tremendous difference out there. So, how do we continue to move forward with those kind of great efforts? And that's where the work of the Science Committee, Dr. Baird and I, come in. We have primary jurisdiction over the non-defense related energy research programs at the Department of Energy. We have primary jurisdiction as an authorizing committee over the National Science Foundation, the National Lab System, and all of these great research-oriented groups. So we have worked hard, whether it was the Energy Act of 2020, on the first comprehensive reauthorizations in the previous session of Congress in the last days, which unfortunately, because there was so much going on, the major accomplishment was missed because we were a part of a multi-thousand-page bill. That, I think, is an example of a committee working together to try and address these needs. And in this session of Congress, Dr. Baird and I have worked on bills to reauthorize those research programs at the Department of Energy, doubling those. We worked on bills to reauthorize the National Science Foundation's research, a number of other entities too, essentially over the next 5 years, doubling the authorized funds. Because in the world we live in, not only is it a matter of survival for the entire world, we're also locked in some technological competitions with very aggressive competitors around the world. And they understand that spending lavishly on basic research is how we as a nation got to this point, and they want to duplicate it. They want to beat us at our own game. So we're working hard. We're making some progress, and along with the help of our appropriator friends, wink, wink, nod, nod, right, Dr. Baird? I think we have a bright future ahead of us, but we can't let up. We just can't let up, Dan.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you, Frank. Appreciate those comments, and thanks for your leadership on the committee. Jim, Mr. Baird, anything you'd like to add before we turn to our
You
guest?
bet. I had some thoughts down here, but as I listen to the two of you and I see what our witnesses represent, I just like to say that it's exciting what's happening in agriculture as well as in the Science Committee, and provides a basis for our future. If you look at some of the basic research that was done, and that's really a hard issue. That's a hard issue to determine. What basic research do you do today that has a result down the road? Many times when you conduct research, you're looking at a particular reaction or whatever, or a particular part of a piece, and then you will find other places you need to have more research. And I'm going to use the example here that And I don't know that, but anyway, when you have photosynthesis, which occurs in all the plants, you're interested in the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and water and so on that comes from that process. But my point is, at the cellular level, mammalian tissue is, across species, very similar. And those little cells that you can't even see, and I mean, you have to have a microscope to see, they take in food, Frank, they take in nutrients, and they excrete byproducts, and then you get specialized cells when you get into a species like a human being, that you get into organs and skins and other stuff. And so it's exciting to have the opportunity to have encouraging basic research. And then we've advanced so far from photosynthesis as a beginning, but we have advanced so far, and it's been because of the research that's been conducted. And we have quantum computing now. We're even able to go out into these farm fields and take a look at the phenotype of soybean plants, for example, and take huge amounts of data, but we can narrow that down and connect it to the genotype. So I guess I'm just trying to emphasize how important basic research and the science committee and their actions, as well as private industry and what they do to add to that database. In fact, one last comment. If you look at soybean fields today, right, and they look like a green carpet, they're all the same height, the plants are, no weeds or any of that sort of thing. And that's because of agriculture and science and basic science and a result of the science committee and the agriculture.
Truly amazing. Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. Well, I promised you that I would introduce our special guests. We are delighted and honored to have three leaders in their profession. First, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Spencer Nelson. Mr. Nelson is the Senior Research Director at ClearPath. He leads ClearPath's research on the most affordable and efficient paths to energy system decarbonization. Mr. Nelson works with industry, national labs, which I have one in my district, the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Yeah, good. As well as other stakeholders to develop insights that guide both ClearPath's work and a broader carbon mitigation effort. So Spencer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chairman Newhouse, Ranking Member Lucas, Representative Baird. I'm really glad to be here and talk on this really important issue, one that I don't think gets enough attention. ClearPath works on accelerating breakthrough energy technologies across both the power sector and in the industrial sector, and really focused on trying to make clean energy cheaper rather than traditional energy more expensive. And we really think that's the pathway to dealing with climate change. From our perspective, climate change is a serious issue that we need to solve, and that really starts with developing and deploying clean energy technologies. But I think the thing that a lot of folks don't realize is that clean energy still remains a very small fraction of the actual energy that we use today. We're working very hard on expanding that level, but it's still at about 16% of total energy consumption on a global basis. And that means there's a lot more work to do to try to find ways to capture emissions from existing sources and develop newer types of technologies. And a large-scale energy system transformation is going to still take a lot of time and effort. And that's really where the role of science and innovation and the work of the Science Committee and all the work of the Energy and Water Development Subcommittee is important. I put together a recent report called Clear Path to a Clean Energy Future. It's a little bit of a cheesy name, considering we're ClearPath. But we looked at where we've come so far in the power sector and where we're heading, and we found that emissions in the power sector in the United States have declined about 40% over the last 15 years due to hydraulic fracturing and renewables cost reductions. But going forward, we might actually end up flatlining in emissions reductions because there's a lot of growth in the overall electric grid. There are a lot of nuclear plants that might retire, and then a lot of the most economic coal to gas switching opportunities are running out. So I think that really presents an opportunity to be looking at innovation of new technologies to make sure that we're able to continue emissions reductions without dramatically raising the prices of electricity. And I want to also say that this is not something that only the United States is leading in and is advancing in. I think you mentioned, Ranking Member Lucas, the role of China in kind of competing on clean energy technology research. Recently, I think if you combine the state-owned entities that are essentially state-captured companies in China, along with the funded research from the government there, they've actually surpassed us in terms of total R&D spending, whereas previously we were the leader. I think it's something that really matters for the long term, because if we're not having the right investment here, we can't make sure that our companies are set up to succeed in a global marketplace where there's a lot of market distortions and subsidies, especially from other countries. Of course, the Science and Technology Committee has been a real leader in that. Last year and the year before that, I worked on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee on the staff of Chairman Lisa Murkowski. So when I was there, I worked really closely with your staff, a couple of whom are here in the audience as well, to put together the Energy Act 2020. You mentioned it was a big deal. I brought a printed copy so that people could actually see, because I don't think anyone has actually seen this document. It's 533 pages of painstakingly negotiated bipartisan, bicameral work to reauthorize.
Legislation done the correct way.
Absolutely. We spent months over Zoom with 40 of us in these Zoom chats to go through line by line to make sure that it was something that everyone agreed with. And because it was done in a really thoughtful, bipartisan way, it's also a really durable policy, and it's going to stick around for a long time to come. So too much, obviously, for me to go through everything that's in here today, but some of the really important pieces that are going to be critical to continuing a low-cost emissions reduction trajectory include carbon capture development, advanced nuclear reactors, geothermal, which I know you were a leader of, long-duration energy storage, and things like the Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy. A recent analysis from Resources for the Future, which is a think tank, looked at what the impact of funding the Energy Act of 2020 at the full levels would be, and they found that the average impact would be $30 to $40 billion per technology. And they only looked at 5 of those technologies because it would be very difficult to actually analyze this entire bill. So it shows that there's some real benefits over the next few years of making sure that we're implementing this and setting up the private sector to succeed. And then I also want to mention a couple of the real world impacts as well, because I know we can talk a lot about economic impact. It's really important to talk about real, tangible things. One example is the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, which I'm sure you're aware of. That's going to demonstrate 2 commercial advanced nuclear reactors by 2028, one of which will be in southeastern Washington State at the Columbia Generating Station. That'll be a high temperature gas reactor. And then another one that's also really important is going to be the Natrium reactor, which is going to be demonstrated at a coal plant in Wyoming that's going to shut down, and that's going to provide a real lifeline to that community that depends on it for economic growth. There's a lot of other things in the bill too, like long duration energy systems that are more resilient to weather events. But there are real world impacts from the science and research that goes on with this committee. So to just kind of bring it all together, I know not all of these are going to be big headline news items, but innovation is really the thing that keeps our country going and keeps us strong and gives us that competitive edge in an otherwise heavily subsidized and difficult marketplace. So I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, and I think this is a really vital part of National Clean Energy Week.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Nelson. You can bet those headlines will be big in the communities that are directly impacted, and there'll be an impact throughout the whole country. So thank you for your comments. Next, we have Mr. Nick Loris. Nick is the Vice President of Public Policy at C3 Solutions. He's an expert in a wide range of energy and climate policies, including natural resource extraction, energy subsidies, nuclear energy, renewable power, and energy efficiency. Mr. Loris also studies ways in which markets will improve the environment, reduce emissions, and better adapt to a changing climate. All big stuff.
Yeah, all big stuff. That's
Yes.
right. Yeah. Well,
Nick,
thank you, Chairman.
take
Yeah,
it over.
appreciate it. And thank you, Ranking Member Lucas and Representative Baird. And Representative Baird, to your point about basic science trickling down to farmers, just before I was making my way over here, I was reading a study in Argonne's National Laboratory Journal, and they were talking about studying the different phosphorus content in fertilizers, taking soil samples from Kansas based on different calcium levels in the soil. And basically the conclusion of the study was they might be able to change the different phosphorus contents in those fertilizers to yield greater farm incomes, greater farm productivity, while yielding environmental benefits as well. And so, this is kind of where that basic research starts and how we can see it generate all the way down to farmers in Kansas. It's a great pathway toward from innovation and concept to market implementation. So thank you again for allowing me to be here. It's a real honor. When I was thinking about the role of public policy, the role of the Science Committee in innovation, I was reminded of a quote from a 19th century Danish-American journalist, and I'm paraphrasing the quote, but he said something along the lines, his name was Jacob Riis, and he said, when nothing seems to really help me, I think of a stone cutter hammering away at a rock, and he'll hammer at it 100 times without as much of a crack in it, and at the 101st blow, the rock will split in half. And I know it wasn't the last blow that did it, but everything that went before it. And I really think that's a good line of thinking when it comes to the role of the committee and the role of public policy for innovation. It's conversations like these, it's painstaking discussions over 500 plus pages of legislation, it's discussion drafts, it's letters, it's all of these things. It's talking with people, the private sector, think tanks. All of that yields good public policy that can then trickle down in forms of transformative energy technologies. And I think one of the things that's important is, to have some patience with it as well. Is that there are a lot of benefits from committing to long time horizons when it comes to research and development, where the commercial application might not necessarily be clear. That leads to advances in scientific understanding or scientific discovery. It was the national labs, for instance, that discovered good cholesterol back in the 1960s. And then it was the national labs again, researchers at Berkeley, that understood how good cholesterol can turn into bad cholesterol, which then led to the development of medication that can prevent and reduce the risk of heart disease. And it's that latter concept that gets us all sorts of technologies and products that we use every single day that we rely on and tend to take for granted that they started as basic concepts from government research, whether it's GPS or internet, microchips, and of course clean energy advancements as well. And so I'm very appreciative of everything that's gone into policies like the Energy Act of 2020, as well as the Securing American Leadership in Science and Technology Act as well, because it really sets that framework from concept to market to implementation. And I don't necessarily know what will be the next transformative energy technology, but I know that when we have policies like the Energy Act of 2020 and SALSTA, we're getting more bites at the apple. So we're expanding the technologies that we're researching into, whether it's direct air capture, long-term battery storage, or hydrogen, and providing more opportunities for researchers to take that from basic research to the marketplace. And I think that's one of the best opportunities for government R&D in the national lab system. Is there's a number of different mechanisms by which innovation can happen. It's the researchers given more autonomy with stronger conflict of interest rules that help allow researchers to take this from concept to market. It's private companies partnering with the national labs and using the facilities to increase the range and duration of a battery. It's opportunities like how we got GPS and the internet, where there's basic R&D for a national security reason or a national objective that may have little to do with the end commercial product that we actually have, and yet it's afforded all of this economic benefits and job creation in the United States and around the world. So, it provides such an important pathway, no matter how the research comes. And I know that, the free enterprise system is so critical in driving innovation and creating jobs, but the national lab system, the government research institutes, academic institutions all provide that basic hub and such a necessary complementary role that we wouldn't be in the same place we are today without those institutions. And I think we all want to see more internets and less Solyndras, and I'm confident, with the right policy reforms as well as the right policy leadership, we'll get there. So I appreciate, again, the time to be here today and talk about this necessary and important role for the federal government.
Thank you. Very, very important stuff the committee works on. And you touched on a lot of it. I have to confess, I'll probably think of Frank and Jim pounding on rocks for most of their
Absolutely.
So, appreciate those comments. I'll turn to our final participant, Dan Byers. He's Vice President of Climate and Technology at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Energy Institute, with a focus on domestic and international climate policy as well as a broader environmental and regulatory issues. Mr. Byers develops and implements strategies in support of the Chamber's broader education and advocacy efforts. So, Dan, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Lucas, Representative Baird. If you will indulge me just a minute at the beginning, I am a former Science Committee staffer, so I am biased. I will disclose that up front.
But you had a bright look in your eye.
I just want to share on the metro ride over here, and I will show my age. I was hired by Sherry Bollert in December of 2001 to work on the Science Committee, and I worked for him for 5 years. And he passed away just today.
Oh,
and
really?
so I want to say a word. And he was a wonderful man and a giant. His mark is left all over the federal science enterprise in terms of the bills that he passed. And I think part of what we'll talk about today is the bipartisan nature of the Science Committee, and you can really trace the roots of that back to Sherry's approach to legislating. So I just wanted to share that sad news.
Well, thank you for doing that. It's very appropriate today.
Just a few days short of his 85th birthday.
Yes,
correct?
about to turn 85. So, well, look, I want to make a few comments to build on what Spencer and Nick said, and I think I'll start by saying, for the Chamber of Commerce members, and you see this every day in news and press releases, businesses across all sectors are making commitments. They want to be good stewards of the environment and make sure that we continue to clean the air and address environmental concerns. And so they're making a lot of climate-related commitments. And when we talk to them about how we will achieve those commitments over the past several years, you're seeing increasing focus and recognition of the importance of the work that this committee does in the federal science enterprise in enabling that. So these emissions goals that have been set out that are very ambitious, not just by businesses, but by state and local governments and other governments around the world, are going to rely on the work that's funded through this committee. And so we call that the technology imperative. I have statistics that I'll just throw at you, and hopefully it's not too many numbers, but it just really illustrates that importance. So if you will, I'll just go down. I'll give you 5 numbers, and I think they really provide the context and make the case for it. First number is 50%. That is the projected energy demand increase globally between 2018 and 2050. The world is hungry for energy. There are many nations still impoverished, and they want to have access and the modern conveniences that we all enjoy today. Second number, 7.8 gigatons. A gigaton is 1 billion tons of CO2 emissions. There's about 35 gigatons worldwide of emissions right now. The United States total is 5.7. 7.8 is the expected growth during that same time period as a result of that energy demand. Overall, 7.8 gigatons of new emissions coming from Africa, China, India, developing world. So it illustrates that even if the U.S. were to go to zero, you're not necessarily addressing the climate problem because of increased emissions elsewhere. Third figure, and it's related, 503 gigawatts. These are the capacity of coal plants that are in the current pipeline, either under construction or planned. And that is on top of another 850 gigawatts of coal that was just built in the last 10 years. Those coal plants are going to run for 30, 40, 50 years or more. And to give you some perspective, there's about 215 gigawatts of coal in the US. So this is double, triple, quadruple the capacity of US coal that is being brought online and will run for a very long time. Again, illustrates that we need to think about the climate challenge as a global challenge.
Again, in those developing countries.
Right, right. And fourth number, 14%, and this is as of 2018, that is the US share of global emissions. It's actually slowly declining. It's down about 12% now. So we are a shrinking slice of a growing pie of emissions. Now, all those statistics are not to throw our arms up and say, well, we aren't the problem. We're not going to do anything about it. But it does illustrate that we need to really have a global approach that works. And like Spencer said, the way to do that is to make clean energy affordable for the rest of the world that is hungry for energy. And that's where the Science Committee comes in. And I'll just mention the fifth stat, and the one that I think is most compelling and really hard to get your mind around, that is 45%. That is the share of global emissions reductions that will need to come from technologies that currently do not exist on a commercial scale if we were to meet net zero goals. Okay, so in other words, if you have mid-century global net zero goals that are essentially becoming the consensus target, 45% of the emissions reductions necessary to meet those goals come from technologies that don't exist yet. So we need to make them exist, and that's where the Science Committee comes in. And just make a couple of final points. I think the Chamber last year, if our numbers are correct, we endorsed 14 different bills that were crafted through the Science Committee on all the areas that Spencer mentioned: energy storage, CCS, advanced nuclear, industrial technologies, renewables, and more. We think they're all important. You really have to take a kitchen sink approach here. And the beauty of it is they were bipartisan. And they were enacted as part of the Energy Act. And when they're bipartisan and crafted in this collaborative process, I think the business community can take heart, because you know that then it's much more likely to be a durable policy. And that stands, in contrast, frankly, with what we see right now when we look at the reconciliation bill going on. And no matter what the merits of the particular climate policies in that bill is, when it goes through essentially a hyper-partisan, non-deliberative approach, not using regular order, that adds uncertainty, because we know that the political winds will change, and it's far more likely to be changed or completely repealed by future Congresses. And that's something that businesses place a premium on: policy certainty. That's what helps give them the confidence to plan and invest, especially when you're talking about energy, which is capital intensive. You're talking about multi-billion-dollar investments over many decades. It's really important to have signals from the federal government policy apparatus that policy is going to be durable. So with that, I will stop and answer any questions.
Well, we've got some challenges ahead into the future. So this is not unlike a committee hearing, but this is a very informal setting. But we'd love to ask some questions of you gentlemen. So Jim and Frank, be thinking about that. I'll start out by asking you, Frank and Jim, a little bit about the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. I served on that committee my first term, so I know a little bit about it. And I know that unlike a lot of committees on Capitol Hill, much of what goes through this committee, I guess you could say, probably not all, but much is done so on a bipartisan way. It's kind of a refreshing committee to be able to witness the product that you are able to come up with. And so in that respect, I guess what I'd like to hear from you guys, what are some of the priorities of the committee? If you could relate some of those, and what are some of the things that you'd like to see that would help further innovative clean energy technologies, if that's something that you could share with us?
I'll go first, if that's all right. First, the culture of the committee. And I've been a member for 20 plus years. I spent much of my time on financial services and the Ag Committee as chairman well in the past. Science Committee as I try to explain to brand new members coming into Congress, is the fun committee. If there is a committee in the United States House of Representatives anymore, it's absolutely fun. A committee that's about the future. A committee that's about, as my mother, a child of the Great Depression, would have said, a Buck Rogers moment, the old comic strip in the 1930s Sunday papers. This is that committee. Historically, a bipartisan group established in 1958 as a part of the response to Sputnik and the efforts to aggressively move forward on the space program. A committee that probably, not many years ago, kind of worked its way into a rather intense debate about the buzzword at the time, global warming. You remember some of the rancorous discussions over a period of time. In my tenure on the committee, and Dr. Baird's tenure, we've worked really hard on our side of the aisle, and I think with Chairwoman Johnson on the other side, to move us back to that more traditional focus, the future. How do we achieve it? How do we get there? The Energy Act of 2020 was critically important, not just for the subject matter, but by the fact that it represented a return to bipartisan legislating based on trust and the involvement of senior and junior and all staffers on both sides. I'm really proud of that document, again, not just for the content, but the way it was put together. And that enabled us this year to pass bills out of committee addressing the Department of Energy research programs and science for the future and a variety of other things. So we're moving forward. Now, that's not to say, Mr. Chairman, that you don't have a Republican imprint on there, because there have been occasions when my Democrat friends have come across with bills. Well, the Energy Act is a classic example. The original price tag was weighed in at $208 billion. And by the time we came to the final product, we were at $35 billion, reflecting a very careful, methodical use of the funds, representing a consistent ramp up of those funds. It established the groundwork. Just established the groundwork. And if I could for just a moment more, we have some challenges coming this year. I believe there's a consensus on both sides of this great building and down at the White House that we need to spend dramatically more money on basic research programs we have jurisdiction over. Part of the issue that Dr. Baird and I are struggling with now is what model do we use to dramatically increase these resources? There are some who think that perhaps a model used in China or Europe, where the money is super targeted, super focused, is the way to go. I think we've been arguing aggressively that the traditional model of our research programs of letting the dollars flow where the need is and letting the research take a life of its own and pursue the potentials that come up, that's the way to go. So we're going to test before this year's over with this wonderful civility and working relationship we have. But I cannot imagine the federal government prognosticating and issuing edicts to the scientific community and having anything productive come from it. We have to let the best and brightest minds live up their potential. So my observations about the committee.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Jim, any thoughts?
Just a couple I might add, and Frank really did a great job. He provides good direction, and I've enjoyed being with him on the committee. He manages to keep it focused and headed in the right direction. But you asked about the areas, Dan, that I'm kind of interested in. So I was going to throw out a couple. One of those being, the reason I mentioned starch a while ago, or carbohydrates, that's CHO, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. If you take the oxygen out, you got CH. Methane is CH4. So coal is coal and oil and that kind of thing. So I'm getting around to the biomass, breaking down biomass to generate energy, as well as anaerobic digesters. We've got some farm facilities in my district that have giant anaerobic digesters that ends up producing that methane gas. You can condense that and use it as a fuel. One of the operations has 40 trucks running on that. So I'm interested in your comments. All three of you really made a mention about the the national labs, the universities, and then private industry coming together. And I think that's a really productive way. But those are a couple of areas that I'm interested, or I think we're interested in. And
Okay.
biomass, and I just suggest too that just recently come across some data that says, you know, the rumen of a cow is an anaerobic digestion system, and they do eructate methane gas. But we've found that we've got feed ingredients that we can feed to those cattle and reduce that methane gas generation by 46% or something. So, those areas are, it's just exciting, you know, in terms of being on the committee and getting into those areas, as Frank mentioned, that's just kind of exciting. I like research.
Good, good. So now is an opportunity for you guys to ask a question too, of these fine gentlemen, if you have anything.
If I might begin, my comments about how what I hope to be substantial new resources to basic research are utilized in this country. If you would mind offering your opinions, whether it's, as Dr. Baird and I would, I think, say, properly funding the existing research programs that are ongoing, or creating this new set of targets or silos or focused areas. Give me your feel about where this maybe once in a generational burst of new resources, how it should be applied.
I'll start. You know, I agree with you. I think flexibility is important because, you know, given Dan's statistics about, you know, not knowing where the next transformative energy technology is going to be or take place or not yet fully developed, I think the more we can empower the researchers to make that determination rather than, you know, siloing those research dollars to specific technologies, I worry that those resources will then get trapped in unproductive places, because I think once you start funding those things, even if it is unproductive, it's difficult to unfund those things. So, you know, I really appreciate having some adaptability, some flexibility, some trust in the national labs and the researchers and our academic institutions, fully having, you know, the necessary oversight and accountability for how we spend those dollars. But I think we need to trust the people who are the experts.
Yeah, I think the points I would add, look, the Energy Act is great. It's applied research focused in all these areas with specific targeted outcomes. But the basic research is absolutely critical to be complementary to that. I mean, I always think of the football analogy, which is basic research is the strength and conditioning program. That's the weight room. And nobody turns on the TV to watch them lifting weights, but without it, you're not going to be very good. And so it's really important to complement that. And again, we can see this through time. I think about the lithium-ion battery, right, which now is in all of our phones and laptops and even electric vehicles. That dates right back to Department of Energy basic chemistry research in the late 80s and 90s. They didn't know necessarily what the outcome of it would be. There has to be an acceptance for some level of failure, but it does produce a lot of fruit over time. And I know the other thing that we would compliment, we shared the SALSTA legislation for members, feedback, is the emphasis on workforce, because we have businesses that have a very difficult time filling openings for skilled positions, particularly high-skilled science engineers, et cetera. And so the continued emphasis on that is also really important when we think about the long game.
Yeah, absolutely agree. If you don't have the broad basic research, you can't be effective in the applied research. I think there's a way you can marry some of the applied research with technology neutral goals as well that can couple with basic research, by trying to say we want to make sure that the cost of transportation is at X level below where it is today while being cleaner. But there are ways that you can do some of these more targeted funds in a technology neutral way and couple that with a really broad basic research that brings you to the point that you can do the applied research.
And could I ask one more thing of our friends?
Absolutely.
One of the topics of several hearings in the full committee, and one of the things that's the most unnerving is, of course, we've gone through a year and a half of COVID. You can call it the lost year or the year of the damned or however you want to describe it. But it's blatantly obvious that it has disrupted research both in industry and at universities. It's caused problems at the national lab system. And all of these graduate students and these postdoctorate students working on all of their projects and their efforts being totally disrupted. We've had some discussion about the need to go in and try to fill the hole created by this lost year and a half on all these careers and all these projects. Are you seeing that from your vantage point, that we've, through no control of their own, fate has disrupted their careers, their future, and the technological efforts they're working on?
I personally have friends who were in PhD programs, one of which is at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. He's working with Oak Ridge National Lab, and he was just unable to go into the lab to do any of his battery chemistry research. And he's decided that essentially, he's already been in his PhD for 3 years. He's instead going to go work in industry instead. And I've heard this from actually several friends who work in energy research, that they're either going to stick it out, but they've lost a year of research, or they're going to just move on and no longer continue. It's a big issue.
I'd say the same for small businesses too. I mean, the largest non-federal partner with the national labs is small businesses, and small businesses are really the engine of economic growth. And so that's also a lost opportunity, and something I really have appreciated the committee's focus on when it comes to tech transfer. We like predictable increases in spending for basic R&D, but the focus hasn't been lost either on trying to transfer that technology and incorporate small businesses. And so that emphasis, I think, needs to be re-emphasized for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree as well. And it's just another easily overlooked aspect of the pandemic and how it has slowed things down. So hopefully we can emerge from it very soon.
We've had a little difficulty getting resources focused in the direction. It's always more exciting to blow up the next balloon than it is to finish the last one, right, Doc? And in a number of disciplines, thinking about ag in particular, when those research projects stopped, everything was lost. And they have to start all over again in so many disciplines.
So you brought up, Nick, tech transfer, and a lot of the work that the committee does eventually makes it to on-the-ground reality project.
Mm-hmm.
So could you guys talk a little bit about that, the importance of the committee direction and what that means as far as how does that translate to getting work done on the ground?
Yeah, I think what the committee has done and what policymakers have done is set the pathway for that to happen. If you look at the number of cooperative research development agreements, or CRADAs, they have increased pretty significantly over the past 5 fiscal years. I think it's increased from 666 to over 1,000 over the past 5 fiscal years. Agreements to commercialize technology have increased from 75 to 125 over the same time period. So I think that pathway has been vitally critical. And you're seeing announcements left and right. Again, they're kind of like the Energy Act itself. So it's kind of quiet climate policy, as our friends at the Breakthrough Institute like to talk about it. And it just, I think last June, there's a small startup called Oklo, a small nuclear company that entered into an agreement for a technology commercialization fund with Argonne National Laboratory. It's a fast reactor, will use spent fuel. It's those types of public-private relationships that I think can really get some of these innovative startups off the ground.
I think the point I would make is there's a sweet spot on technology transfer, right? You don't necessarily want the federal programs and activities picking winners and losers, where it's really down near the commercial stage of things. That can actually scare away private capital, right? If one entity is chosen, then potentially other entities won't receive investment if that sort of market decision has been made already. But you do need to fill the spot where there's going to be a de-risking and get any technology to a stage where private capital is going to come in and then sort of let the market decide. And there's plenty of private capital out there that is very eager to come into clean energy and develop technologies and sell them around the world. You just have to make sure that you protect intellectual property and that you have the focus of the federal agencies on sort of the right stages of research.
Good. Good. So it's pretty clear to me through this conversation that the Science, Space, and Technology Committee plays a pretty important role in developing innovative, clean energy future sources. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you for being part of this today. It's, I think we just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg of so much that we should be talking about in Congress as it relates to our energy future. So thank you for being part of this today. Give the opportunity for anybody to make any closing comments if you'd like.
I would just simply say, once again, Science, Space, and Technology Committee is the fun committee. We haven't even talked about the moon or Mars. We haven't discussed all the breakthroughs in computing technology and all of those sort of things. There is so much going on. The average citizen who used to come to my town meetings when I could have public town hall meetings doesn't have a clue, one, about the size of the investment we've made, or the magnitude of the investment we need to make. But when you sit down and discuss with him all of the things that has come from this research and how far it's driven society forward. My classic example is 100 years ago approximately, the Spanish flu pandemic rolled through North America, slaughtered hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people. And what was the response? Put a mustard pack on your chest, give you a shot of Epsom salts, and you died. But with the supercomputers and all the investments in modern technology, think about how rapidly we responded with not one, but two, but three, but four vaccine programs, how prepared we were to address issues. My late father used to say, no matter what anyone says about last year or 50 years ago or 60 years ago, these are the good old days. He was right. From a technology, scientific perspective, these are the good old days. And if we make the right decisions on investing in basic research, a year from now, 5 years from now, 30 years from now, they'll even be better good old days. We're lucky to be alive now. We just need to make sure that the effort of our predecessors continues forward at an accelerated rate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Jim. Dan, Nick, Spencer, thank you very much. And thank you all for watching. This is an important subject, and I'm confident now more than ever that because of the work of not only the private industry, but also the public sector through the Science Committee, that the United States will continue to be a leader in innovative energy production. So thank you very much.